Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Wisdom channel. Tonight, we explore spirituality, not as an escape from life, but as a way of seeing life more clearly. Across human history, people have sensed that survival alone is not enough. There is a deeper hunger in us. It asks what we are. It asks why peace can feel so close, yet so difficult to keep. Spirituality begins with that question. It does not always begin in a temple. It often begins in a private moment, when the mind becomes still enough to notice its own restlessness. In this journey, we will look at teachings that have shaped human beings for thousands of years. Some are ancient. Some feel startlingly modern. Each one points toward a different way of understanding attention, suffering, love, purpose, and the self. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, there is nothing you need to do but settle in. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow. And allow the day to loosen its hold as we explore the inner world of spirituality together. Let's begin. Spirituality begins when ordinary life starts asking extraordinary questions. It often starts in the middle of something completely normal. A person washes a cup, hears a child laugh, watches someone die, or wakes before dawn with a feeling that cannot be explained away. Nothing supernatural has to happen. The strange part is that familiar life suddenly stops feeling familiar. A meal becomes a mystery of dependence. A breath becomes evidence that life is being received before it is understood. A passing thought reveals how little control we have over the mind that feels so personal. This is why spirituality has never belonged only to temples or sacred books. It begins when experience becomes too deep for habit. Some people chase that feeling through ancient rituals. Others find it through grief, beauty, illness, love, or failure. The doorway is usually not dramatic. It is the moment when a person realizes that being alive is not ordinary at all. Nearly every culture discovered silence before it discovered philosophy. Long before people built systems of thought, they learned that stillness changes perception. Hunters waited without speaking because attention mattered. Elders sat apart because wisdom needed space. Monks later turned silence into a discipline, but the instinct is far older than monasteries. In many traditions, silence was not emptiness. It was treated as a kind of listening. The remarkable thing is how widely this pattern appears. A person does not need a doctrine to notice that constant noise weakens the mind. Silence can expose hidden fear, but it can also reveal a steadier form of intelligence. Some people believe this is why sacred places often reduce ordinary speech. The visitor is not being made passive. The visitor is being made available. When the mouth rests, the mind loses one of its favorite hiding places. What remains can feel uncomfortable at first, but that discomfort may be the beginning of real seeing. The oldest spiritual teachings often begin with attention, not belief. Before a person is asked to accept a grand idea, many wisdom traditions ask them to notice something simple. Watch the breath. Observe anger as it rises. Listen before speaking. Taste food without rushing. This may sound modest, but it is a radical beginning. Attention proves that inner life is not as automatic as it seems. A person can witness a thought instead of becoming it. A person can feel a craving without obeying it. Ancient teachers understood that belief without awareness can become borrowed furniture in the mind. It may look impressive, but it cannot support a life under pressure. Attention is different. It turns the person into the laboratory. Some modern people find this surprising because spirituality is often presented as faith first. Yet in many teachings, the first instruction is almost experimental. Look carefully, then look again. Reality may be stranger than opinion, but only attention can find out. Many traditions say the self is smaller than it appears. This idea can feel shocking because ordinary life is built around the feeling of being someone solid. We defend our name, our memories, our preferences, and our story. Yet spiritual traditions repeatedly suggest that the self is partly a construction. Buddhism examines it through changing sensations and thoughts. Hindu philosophy asks whether the witness behind experience is deeper than personality. Christian mystics speak of surrendering the false self. Even Stoic practice challenges the ego by separating what belongs to us from what merely happens around us. The point is not that a person is nothing. The point is that the familiar me may be less fixed than it feels. This insight can be unsettling, but it can also be freeing. If the self is smaller than imagined, then many insults lose power. Many fears shrink. Many old identities stop acting like prison walls. A person may discover that less ego can mean more life. Ancient seekers treated breath as a bridge between body and mind. Breathing is strange because it belongs to two worlds at once. It happens by itself, yet we can also guide it. That simple fact made it important in many spiritual systems. Yogic traditions studied breath as prana. Buddhist practice used it as an anchor for awareness. Sufi breathing helped shape remembrance. In prayer traditions, breathing could become linked with sacred words. The fascination is not difficult to understand. Change the breath, and the body often changes. Slow it, and the mind may stop racing. Hold it, and fear appears quickly. Follow it, and attention gains a place to rest. Some people see breathwork as a forgotten technology of the inner life. It needs no machine, no title, and no audience. It is always present. That may be why ancient teachers gave it so much respect. The breath is ordinary enough to ignore, yet powerful enough to transform the state of a human being. Spiritual practice can change a person before opinions ever do. A person may argue beautifully about compassion and still be cruel when tired. Another person may know little theory and still become kinder through daily discipline. This is one of spirituality's most important lessons. Practice reaches places that opinion cannot touch. Repeated gratitude changes what the mind searches for. Repeated patience changes the body's response to delay. Repeated prayer can reshape the emotional life before a person can explain what has happened. This is why traditions often care less about clever ideas than faithful repetition. Some people think transformation comes from finding the perfect belief. The older view is more demanding. It says that we become what we rehearse. A ritual performed with sincerity may educate the nervous system. A vow kept under pressure may reveal a new identity. The fascinating part is that a person can be changing before they feel changed. The roots move first. The visible life follows later. The desire for meaning may be one of humanity's oldest instincts. Food keeps the body alive, but meaning tells the mind why life is worth continuing. Archaeologists find burial practices that suggest early humans cared about more than survival. Bodies were sometimes placed with objects, pigments, or signs of attention. We cannot know exactly what those gestures meant, but they show that death was not treated as simple disposal. Something in human beings wanted significance around the hardest facts of existence. That impulse still lives in us. People make promises at bedsides. They mark births with ceremonies. They return to graves. They search suffering for a lesson because random pain feels almost impossible to carry. Some people believe this hunger for meaning is evidence of a deeper spiritual dimension. Others see it as a human response to uncertainty. Either way, it is powerful. A life without meaning may continue biologically, but it becomes difficult to inhabit. Meaning is the hidden architecture that lets experience become bearable. Mystics across cultures often describe reality as deeply connected. This is one of the most intriguing patterns in spiritual history. People separated by language, geography, and doctrine have described moments when ordinary boundaries seemed less absolute. A mystic may speak of union with God. A sage may speak of oneness. A contemplative may say that the separation between observer and world became thin. These reports are not identical, and they should not be flattened into one simple claim. Still, the resemblance is fascinating. It suggests that human consciousness may have recurring depths. Some people interpret these experiences as contact with ultimate reality. Others see them as rare states of perception. Either way, they often leave a moral trace. Many who report deep connectedness come back speaking of compassion, humility, or reverence. That matters. If a private experience makes someone less selfish, it cannot be dismissed as mere fantasy. It may show that separation is useful for daily life, but not the whole truth. Inner peace usually begins with seeing the mind more clearly. Many people imagine peace as a feeling that arrives when life finally behaves. The spiritual view is more challenging. It says, peace begins when a person stops believing every thought that appears. The mind produces judgments, memories, fantasies, warnings, and rehearsed arguments all day long. Most of them arrive without permission. When they are unseen, they feel like truth. When they are observed, they become events. That difference is enormous. A thought can still be painful, but it no longer has total authority. This is why meditation, prayer, self-inquiry, and reflection all return to awareness. They train a person to notice the machinery of suffering. Some thoughts are useful. Some are old fear in new clothing. Some are habits pretending to be wisdom. Clarity does not erase the mind. It changes the relationship. A person learns to sit inside experience without being dragged around by every inner weather change. Spirituality asks what remains when success no longer satisfies. There comes a moment in many lives when the usual prizes lose their magic. A person may achieve the goal, receive praise, gain comfort, or become admired, yet still feel a strange lack. This is not failure in the ordinary sense. It is often the beginning of a deeper inquiry. Spiritual traditions have long warned that external success cannot answer every human need. It can improve conditions, but it cannot by itself create peace. It can decorate a life, but it cannot explain why the heart remains restless. This is why kings, merchants, scholars, and ordinary workers have all become seekers. The question arrives differently for each person, but its force is the same. What is a life for after the obvious answers have been tested? Some people run from that question by seeking more. Others stop and listen. Spirituality begins to matter when achievement is spoken, and something within still waits for truth. Hindu sages explored consciousness with astonishing precision thousands of years ago. The ancient Indian world produced some of the most detailed inner investigations in human history. The Upanishads asked what lies behind thought, perception, and identity. Yoga traditions developed disciplined methods for steadying the mind. Later, philosophers debated whether the deepest self was identical with ultimate reality, or whether individual souls remained distinct. These were not casual speculations. They were careful attempts to map experience from the inside. What makes this so striking is that consciousness is now considered one of the hardest problems in modern thought. Yet long ago, sages were already asking whether awareness can observe itself. They wondered whether the waking mind is only one layer of being. They studied dreams, deep sleep, meditation, and liberation with remarkable seriousness. Some people today read these texts and feel that ancient seekers were working with instruments made of attention. They had no brain scanners, but they had patience. They turned inward and found a universe. Buddhist teaching begins with suffering because honesty must come first. At first, this can sound pessimistic. Yet the Buddha's starting point is almost clinical in its courage. He does not ask people to pretend life is easy. He points to the dissatisfaction woven through craving, loss, aging, fear, and change. This honesty is what gives the teaching its power. Suffering is not treated as a punishment. It is treated as something that can be understood. The famous path begins by diagnosing the human condition, then showing that the mind's relationship to desire can be transformed. That is a startling claim. It says, our pain is not only caused by the world, it is also shaped by clinging. This does not make grief unreal. It makes freedom possible. Some people are drawn to Buddhism because it begins where people actually live. It does not start with perfection. It starts with the ache beneath ordinary experience, then asks whether the ache can become a doorway. Taoist wisdom says forced living often breaks natural intelligence. The Taoist tradition is fascinated by the damage caused by over-control. It looks at nature and notices that growth is not frantic. Water moves around obstacles without losing its nature. Trees do not strain to become trees. The body heals best when conditions allow it to do what it already knows. From this view, human beings suffer because they interfere with life too aggressively. We push, grasp, label, and manage until our original sensitivity becomes dull. The famous idea of Wu Wei is often translated as effortless action, but it does not mean laziness. It means acting in harmony with the situation. A skilled musician does not force every note. A wise leader does not crush every problem. A mature person learns when pressure creates resistance. This teaching feels unusually modern because so many people are exhausted by self-improvement. Taoism whispers something radical. Perhaps life becomes wiser when we stop trying to dominate every movement. Stoic practice trains freedom inside circumstances we cannot control. The Stoics lived in a world of political danger, illness, exile, and sudden loss. Their answer was not fantasy. It was discipline. They divided life into what depends on us and what does not. Reputation, weather, death, other people's choices, and fortune cannot be fully commanded. Judgment, intention, courage, and restraint can be trained. This distinction may sound simple, but it can change an entire life. A person stops wasting strength on what cannot obey them. Then that strength returns to character. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote private reminders to stay steady while ruling an empire. Epictetus had once been enslaved, yet he taught inner freedom with fierce clarity. The surprising thing is that Stoicism does not require retreat from the world. It asks a person to stand in the middle of events and guard the only kingdom that truly belongs to them. Circumstances may press hard, but the inner response can remain disciplined. Sufi poets taught that love can become disciplined perception. In Sufi tradition, love is not merely emotion. It can become a way of knowing. The lover pays attention differently. The heart becomes trained to notice signs of the beloved in ordinary experience. This is why Sufi poetry often sounds passionate while carrying a serious spiritual method beneath the surface. Rumi, Hafiz, and other voices speak of longing, because longing breaks the illusion of self-sufficiency. The person who loves deeply is no longer sealed inside the ego. Devotional practices such as remembrance, music, movement, and service aim to polish perception until reality is felt as saturated with divine presence. Some people misunderstand this as romantic excess. Yet the tradition is often strict. The love being described must purify pride, not feed it. It must widen compassion, not create obsession. That is the fascinating tension. Sufism takes one of the most powerful human forces and asks whether it can become a path toward God. Indigenous traditions often treat the land as a living relationship. Many indigenous worldviews do not begin with the idea that humans stand outside nature. The land is not just property, scenery, or material. It is kin, memory, responsibility, and teacher. A mountain may hold ancestral meaning. A river may carry obligation. An animal may be encountered with gratitude rather than mere use. This way of seeing changes ethics at the root. If the living world is a relationship, then taking without respect becomes a spiritual failure. Some modern people find this difficult because industrial culture often turns places into resources. Indigenous wisdom asks a different question. How should a person behave when the world is not dead matter? This does not mean every tradition says the same thing. It means many share a deep suspicion of separation. The land remembers. The community depends. The human being belongs. In a time of ecological anxiety, this ancient perspective can feel less like nostalgia and more like warning. Christian contemplatives searched for God through stillness and humility. Beyond public worship and formal doctrine, Christianity developed a deep inner tradition. Desert monks withdrew from crowded life to confront temptation, pride, and distraction. Later, contemplatives practiced prayer that moved beyond many words. Their aim was not spiritual spectacle. It was union with God through surrender. This can surprise people who associate Christianity only with sermons or institutions. The contemplative stream is quieter and psychologically sharp. It studies how pride disguises itself as virtue. It notices how restless the mind becomes when deprived of applause. It teaches that humility is not self-hatred. It is truthful, seeing before the divine. Figures such as John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, and the anonymous author of The Cloud of Unknowing describe the soul with extraordinary intensity. Some people see in these writings a map of inner purification. The path does not chase power. It allows the false self to weaken until love can become more real. Jewish mysticism sees everyday action as spiritually consequential. Kabbalistic thought gives ordinary life a remarkable seriousness. In this view, human actions do not remain small. A blessing, a commandment, a word of repair, or an act of justice can participate in the healing of creation. The idea of tikkun gives moral life cosmic weight. A person is not merely behaving well for private improvement. They are helping mend a world that is spiritually fractured. This makes the everyday astonishing. Eating can be sanctified. Speech can build or damage. Time itself becomes structured through Sabbath, prayer, and sacred obligation. Some people are fascinated by Jewish mysticism because it refuses to separate the invisible from the practical. The hidden world is not an excuse to abandon responsibility. It intensifies responsibility. The sacred is carried through action. That means a kitchen table, a courtroom, a marketplace, or a family argument may become spiritually significant. The universe is not only contemplated, it is repaired through conduct. Zen practice makes direct experience more important than explanation. Zen is famous for cutting through excessive thinking. It does not reject intelligence, but it distrusts the kind of intelligence that hides from reality inside concepts. A person can explain water and still be thirsty. A person can describe awakening and remain asleep to the present moment. Zen training uses meditation, discipline, work, and sometimes startling exchanges between teacher and student to interrupt the mind's dependence on explanation. Koans are especially fascinating because they do not behave like ordinary riddles. They corner the intellect, and to them other kind of seeing becomes possible. This is why Zen stories can seem strange at first. A master may answer in a way that feels abrupt, yet the aim is often precision. The student must stop standing outside life as a commentator. Direct experience is not vague. It is immediate. When a cup is lifted, a step is taken, or a sound is heard. Reality is already arriving before thought names it. The Bhagavad Gita turns inner conflict into spiritual instruction. The setting is dramatic. Arjuna stands on a battlefield and collapses under the weight of moral confusion. He does not lack skill. He lacks clarity. Krishna's teaching meets him exactly there, inside a crisis of duty, fear, grief, and identity. This is why the text has endured for so long. It does not treat spirituality as something reserved for peaceful conditions. It asks what wisdom looks like when action is unavoidable. The Gita explores disciplined work, devotion, knowledge, self-mastery, and surrender. But it does so through one human being who cannot escape a decision. That makes it intensely relatable. Many people face smaller versions of Arjuna's dilemma. They must act without perfect certainty. They must choose while the heart is divided. The teaching suggests that freedom is not found by avoiding responsibility. It is found by acting from a deeper center. The outer conflict becomes a mirror for the unseen struggle within. Meditation was never only relaxation in many ancient traditions. For much of history, meditation was closer to training than escape. It was used to sharpen attention, test identity, and expose the hidden movements of desire. In some traditions, the practitioner sat not to feel calm, but to see the mind without disguise. That is a very different goal. Calm might appear along the way, but it was not always the treasure. The deeper question was this: who are you when thought slows down? Ancient monks sometimes treated the mind like a wild animal that could be understood through patient observation. Yogic texts described layers of concentration that could become almost otherworldly. Buddhist schools developed exact methods for watching sensation rise and vanish. Some people even believe advanced meditation preserved a forgotten map of consciousness that modern culture is only beginning to rediscover. The practice looks simple from the outside. A person sits still. Inside, a whole civilization of habits begins to reveal itself. Prayer can be a method of attention as well as devotion. Many people think prayer is only asking for help, but older traditions often treat it as a way of turning the whole person toward what matters most. Words may be spoken, whispered, sung, or held silently, yet the real work is alignment. The scattered mind is gathered. The anxious heart is placed before something greater than itself. In this sense, prayer is not just communication. It is training in direction. A repeated phrase can keep attention from drifting into fear. A morning prayer can shape the moral mood of the day. A prayer before sleep can return unfinished burdens to a larger horizon. Some people see this as psychology. Others see it as contact with the divine. The fascinating part is that both views can recognize its power. A person who prays every day may begin to notice what they truly value. The hidden priorities of the soul become harder to ignore. Rituals help the body remember what the mind forgets. A ritual may seem ordinary until you notice what it is doing. It gives meaning a physical form. A ring on a finger can carry a vow. A bow can teach respect before the ego agrees. A meal shared at a certain time can hold a whole community together across generations. The mind forgets easily because it is distracted, but the body learns through repetition. This is why spiritual traditions rarely depend on ideas alone. They ask people to kneel, stand, wash, light, carry, touch, and return. These actions become memory with muscles. Some people say ritual is only habit, but that misses the deeper possibility. A habit can be empty. It can also be a vessel. When performed with attention, ritual becomes a technology for meaning. It turns belief into behavior. It lets the invisible enter the room through gesture, timing, and shared participation. The body becomes the keeper of sacred memory. Pilgrimage turns movement through space into movement through meaning. A pilgrim does not simply travel to another place. The journey itself becomes part of the teaching. Feet grow tired. Plans fail. Strangers appear. Weather changes the mood of the path. The person who began the journey is slowly tested by distance. This is why pilgrimage appears in so many traditions. It takes spiritual longing out of the head and puts it into the road. The destination matters, but the transformation often happens before arrival. Medieval Christians walk to Santiago. Muslims journey to Mecca. Hindus travel to sacred rivers and temples. Buddhists visit places linked to awakening. Each path carries its own history, but the pattern is deeply human. Some people believe certain places hold accumulated devotion like a charge in the air. Others see the power in the sacrifice required to reach them. Either way, pilgrimage makes one lesson unavoidable. You cannot seek deeply and remain entirely unchanged. Fasting has been used to reveal desire's hidden authority. Food is basic, necessary, and good. That is why giving it up for a time can reveal so much. When hunger arrives, the body speaks plainly. Then the mind begins its negotiations. It complains, bargains, imagines, and invents reasons to quit. Spiritual traditions noticed this long ago. Fasting can show a person how quickly desire becomes command. It can also create gratitude for what was once consumed without thought. In Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and other paths, fasting has served many purposes. It can mark repentance. It can sharpen prayer. It can humble pride. It can remind the wealthy that dependence is universal. Some people have pushed fasting into extremes, and wisdom traditions often warn against vanity disguised as discipline. Still, when held with care, the practice can be strangely revealing. A meal missed on purpose may uncover the unseen ruler within. The stomach speaks, and the soul learns who has been in charge. Chanting can steady attention through rhythm, breath, and repetition. A chant does something that ordinary speech rarely does. It gives the mind one clear track to follow. The voice repeats. The breath settles into pattern. The body begins to participate in meaning before analysis has time to interfere. This is why chanting appears in monasteries, temples, mosques, churches, and household shrines across the world. The words may differ completely, but the effect can feel surprisingly similar. Repetition reduces mental wandering. Shared sound can dissolve the feeling of isolation. A sacred phrase can become more than language because it is carried by breath and intention. Some people believe chanting vibrates through the body in ways that alter consciousness. Others see it as disciplined attention, supported by sound. The mystery remains compelling either way. A room of people chanting together can feel larger than the sum of their voices. The individual mind loosens its grip. Something steady begins to move through the group. Sacred stories often teach psychology before psychology has language. Long before clinical terms existed, human beings told stories about temptation, pride, grief, envy, courage, and transformation. A myth could show what happens when a person refuses limits. A parable could reveal how resentment blinds the heart. A sacred tale could turn an inner conflict into a memorable scene. This is why such stories survive. They do not merely entertain. They give shape to invisible forces. When a child hears about a hero's trial, the child is learning something about fear. When an adult hears about exile and return, the adult may recognize a hidden pattern in their own life. Some people treat ancient stories as disguised maps of consciousness. Others see them as moral teaching preserved through narrative. Either way, they reach parts of the mind that arguments often miss. A good story enters gently, then works in silence. Years later, under pressure, it may return as guidance when theory has disappeared. Monastic life tests how little a person truly needs. To enter a monastery is to challenge an entire culture of appetite. The usual measures of success become less important. Clothing may be simple. Possessions may be few. Time may be organized around prayer, work, study, and silence. This way of life can look severe from the outside, but its question is fascinating. How much of what we call necessity is really addiction, status, or fear? Monastics do not all live the same way, yet many traditions use simplicity as a form of spiritual experiment. Remove luxury. Remove constant entertainment. Remove the pressure to perform a public identity. Then see what remains. Some people discover peace. Others discover restlessness. Both discoveries matter. The monastery is not only a refuge, it is a mirror. It shows how the self behaves when ordinary distractions are taken away. That may be why even outsiders feel drawn to monastic spaces. They suggest another kind of wealth. Compassion becomes stronger when it is practiced before it is felt. Many people wait to feel kind before acting kindly. Wisdom traditions often reverse the order. They teach that the action can train the feeling. A person can feed the hungry while still feeling impatient. A person can listen with respect before warmth has arrived. A person can choose mercy while resentment is still loud inside. This does not make compassion fake. It makes it disciplined. Emotions are weather. Practice is climate. Over time, repeated acts of care can reshape what the heart finds natural. This is why many spiritual paths give specific instructions for generosity, service, forgiveness, and hospitality. They know that waiting for perfect sincerity can become an excuse for doing nothing. Some people find this idea liberating. They do not need to become saints before beginning. They can begin, and the beginning will teach them. Compassion grows muscle through use. The heart learns by being asked to carry more than preference. Gratitude changes perception because attention decides what becomes visible. A grateful person is not pretending life is easy. They are training the mind to notice what pain does not cancel. This is a subtle but powerful distinction. The brain naturally looks for danger, insult, lack, and unfinished business. Gratitude interrupts that habit. It says, "Look again." A cup of water is not small to the thirsty. A friend's patience is not ordinary to the lonely. A safe night of sleep is not meaningless to someone who has lived without safety. Spiritual traditions use gratitude because perception is moral territory. What a person notices will eventually shape what they become. Some people keep gratitude journals. Others offer blessings before meals. Others simply pause before beginning the day. The method matters less than the shift. Gratitude widens reality. It reveals support that was present but unseen. In a culture trained to desire the next thing, thankfulness can feel almost rebellious. It returns value to what already exists. The ego often protects us before it imprisons us. The ego is not only a villain. It helps a child form boundaries. It says, "This is my body, my name, my voice, my place in the world." Without some structure of self, life would be chaotic. The problem comes when that protective structure becomes a fortress. The same ego that once guarded dignity can later defend pride. It can turn disagreement into attack. It can turn correction into humiliation. It can turn success into identity. Spiritual traditions study this trap with great care. They do not always ask us to destroy the ego. More often, they ask us to see through its exaggerations. Some people imagine enlightenment as becoming nobody. A wiser view may be learning when the self is useful and when it is pretending to be the whole universe. The ego begins as a necessary tool. Left unexamined, it becomes the manager of fear. Freedom starts when the manager is questioned. Desire can educate the soul when it is examined honestly. Desire is often treated as an enemy, but it can also be a teacher. What a person wants reveals what they believe will save them. Some desires point toward real needs. Others expose wounds, imitation, boredom, or fear. Spiritual maturity does not come from pretending to want nothing. It comes from asking why a particular longing has such power. A craving for praise may reveal hunger for safety. A craving for control may reveal distrust of life. A craving for pleasure may hide exhaustion that has never been admitted. Many traditions warn against desire because unexamined wanting can rule a life. Yet the investigation itself can become sacred. Instead of obeying desire or crushing it, a person studies it. Where did it begin? What does it promise? What happens after it is fulfilled? These questions turn temptation into information. Desire becomes a messenger. It may not always tell the truth, but it always reveals something. Wisdom traditions rarely promise comfort without inner discipline. Modern spirituality can sometimes sound like constant reassurance, but older teachings are usually more demanding. They understand that peace requires training. A restless mind does not become steady through slogans. A bitter heart does not become forgiving through aesthetic language. A frightened person does not become brave by avoiding difficulty. Discipline is the bridge between inspiration and transformation. That discipline may involve prayer before dawn, meditation after frustration, honest speech during conflict, or restraint when impulse feels strong. None of this is glamorous. That is precisely why it matters. Spiritual depth is built when no one is watching. Some people chase extraordinary experiences because they seem more exciting than ordinary practice. Yet traditions keep returning to small commitments because small commitments reshape the whole person. Comfort may come, but it is not always the first gift. Sometimes the first gift is friction. It reveals the gap between who we claim to be and who we are becoming. The spiritual path often begins with disappointment in shallow answers. A person may spend years accepting the answers handed to them by family, culture, ambition, or habit. Then, something happens. The explanation that once seemed enough no longer reaches the wound. Success feels thin. Entertainment becomes repetitive. Approval loses its force. Even comfortable routines begin to feel strangely incomplete. This disappointment can be frightening because it removes easy certainty. Yet it can also be a summons. Many spiritual journeys begin when a person stops being satisfied by answers that only work on the surface. The question becomes more honest. What kind of happiness cannot be purchased? What kind of identity survives change? What kind of truth remains when applause fades? Some people call this a crisis. Others call it a weakening. The difference may depend on whether the person runs from the emptiness or listens to it. Shallow answers fail for a reason. They break open a space where deeper seeking can finally begin. Humility is not weakness because it makes learning possible. A proud mind has very little room inside it. It already knows. It already defends. It already edits reality to protect its own importance. Humility creates space where truth can enter. This is why nearly every serious wisdom tradition respects it. A humble person is not someone who denies their gifts. A humble person can be corrected without collapsing. They can listen without turning every conversation into a contest. They can stand before mystery without pretending to own it. That is strength of a rare kind. Some people confuse humility with low self-worth, but the two are not the same. Low self-worth is still trapped in self-obsession. Humility is freedom from the constant performance of superiority. It allows a person to learn from a child, a stranger, an enemy, or a mistake. The wise become wise because they remain teachable. The closed mind may look confident, but the humble mind keeps growing. Forgiveness can release the future from the past's control. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as approval, but it is not the same as excusing harm. It does not erase memory. It does not remove the need for boundaries. At its deepest, forgiveness interrupts the way old pain keeps governing new life. A person can carry an injury so long that it begins to shape their expectations, relationships, and identity. The past becomes a hidden author. Spiritual traditions treat forgiveness with seriousness because resentment can feel morally justified while quietly poisoning the one who holds it. This does not mean forgiveness should be rushed. Forced forgiveness can become another wound. Real forgiveness may take time, truth, grief, and courage. Some people begin by simply wishing to be free from hatred. That small wish can matter. It opens a door that bitterness keeps locked. The future does not become pure or painless. It becomes less controlled by what has already happened. That is a form of liberation. Detachment means loving without turning everything into possession. Detachment is often mistaken for coldness. In many spiritual traditions, it means something far more subtle. It means caring deeply while refusing to grip life as if it can be owned. A parent can love a child without demanding that child become an extension of their ego. A friend can offer support without controlling the outcome. A person can enjoy beauty without needing it to last forever. This is not easy. The heart wants to hold what it loves. The trouble begins when holding becomes fear. Then love turns into anxiety, jealousy, or domination. Detachment asks for a cleaner kind of affection. It says, cherish what is here, but do not make your peace depend on possession. Some people find this teaching almost impossible until loss teaches it the hard way. Spiritual practice tries to teach it earlier. The world is full of gifts. but every gift is moving. Love becomes wiser when it learns open hands. Patience reveals how often suffering comes from resistance. Waiting is one of the simplest tests of the human mind. A delayed message, a slow line, a stubborn problem, or a long season of uncertainty can expose how much pain comes from fighting reality before action is even possible. Patience does not mean passive acceptance of everything. It means refusing to add unnecessary torment to what already is. Many traditions value patience because it separates real difficulty from mental resistance. The body is sitting in traffic. The mind is inventing an insult, a catastrophe, and a courtroom argument. The situation may be inconvenient, but the inner reaction multiplies it. Patience creates a small space between event and resistance. In that space, freedom becomes possible. Some people think patience is dull, yet it can be fierce. It keeps a person from being ruled by immediacy. It protects speech from anger. It allows wisdom to arrive before action. Often the delay is not the enemy. The panic around it is. Self-knowledge can be more demanding than belief. Belief can be spoken in a moment. Self-knowledge takes longer because the self is skilled at hiding. A person may believe in compassion while secretly enjoying moral superiority. They may believe in simplicity while being driven by status. They may believe in truth while editing memories to stay innocent. This is why spiritual traditions place such weight on examination. The hard part is not forming noble ideals. The hard part is discovering where the life contradicts them. Self-knowledge asks for attention to motives, habits, fears, resentments, and fantasies. It can feel less inspiring than belief because it removes flattering illusions. Yet without it, belief can become decoration. The person may sound wise while remaining unchanged. Some seekers are drawn to esoteric ideas because they feel grander than looking honestly at envy or pride. But the inner work cannot be skipped. To know the self is to meet the machinery behind the mask. Wonder keeps the mind from becoming spiritually old. The mind grows old when it believes it is finished seeing. Wonder prevents that closing. It does not require ignorance. In fact, the more carefully a person looks, the more astonishing ordinary existence becomes. A seed becomes a lesson in hidden intelligence. A sleeping body becomes a daily surrender. A moral choice becomes a crossroads inside the soul. Children often carry wonder naturally because they have not yet learned to treat reality as boring. Adults must recover it by attention. Spiritual traditions protect wonder through ritual, story, contemplation, and gratitude, because wonder softens certainty. It keeps the world from shrinking into utility. Some people think maturity means being unimpressed. Wisdom suggests the opposite. A person who cannot be astonished may have lost contact with reality's depth. Wonder does not solve every problem. It changes the scale of the one who faces them. The heart becomes less cramped. The mind remembers that existence itself is not obvious. Ancient temples were designed to change attention before teaching doctrine. A temple does not need to explain itself immediately. Its first teaching is often architectural. The path may narrow before it opens. Steps may slow the body. Shadows may soften the eyes. A threshold may announce that ordinary behavior is being left behind. Ancient builders understood that space can educate attention. Before a priest speaks or a text is read, the visitor has already been moved through a sequence of sensations. Height creates awe. Symmetry creates order. Darkness creates inwardness. Distance creates anticipation. Some people believe sacred architecture was a form of ancient psychology hidden in stone. The building shaped the nervous system before shaping belief. This may be why ruins still move people long after the original ceremonies are gone. A person can stand among columns or carved walls and feel that the place is asking for a different kind of presence. The doctrine may be forgotten. The atmosphere of reverence remains strangely alive. The labyrinth made walking itself into a spiritual lesson. Unlike a maze, a labyrinth usually has one path. You do not solve it by cleverness. You surrender to the route. That is what makes it powerful. The walker moves inward, turns away, comes close, moves outward, and eventually reaches the center by a path that never feels direct. Medieval Christians used labyrinths as symbolic pilgrimage. Older patterns appear in other cultures as well. The design turns walking into instruction. Progress does not always look like progress. Nearness can be followed by distance. Confusion can be part of a path that still knows where it is going. Some people see labyrinths as maps of the soul because they imitate the strange rhythm of transformation. We want straight lines, but inner growth often spirals. The feet learn what the mind resists. When a person walks slowly, without needing to win, the pattern does its work. The center is reached not by force, but by trust in the path. Mandalas turn complexity into a disciplined form of contemplation. A mandala can appear decorative to an untrained eye, but in many traditions, it is a serious spiritual instrument. Its patterns organize attention around a center. Every shape has placement. Every boundary matters. In Tibetan Buddhism, monks may spend days creating sand mandalas with extraordinary precision, only to dismantle them afterward. That act can shock modern observers. Why destroy something so beautiful? The answer is the lesson. Beauty is real, and impermanence is real too. The making trains concentration. The dissolution trains non-attachment. Some people believe mandalas represent a hidden order beneath the chaos of ordinary perception. Others experience them as visual prayers that draw the mind away from distraction. The fascination lies in their combination of discipline and release. Nothing is casual in the design, yet nothing is possessed at the end. A mandala teaches that the universe may have structure, but clinging to any form still misses the point. Icons were created as windows for reverent attention. In many Christian traditions, an icon is not treated as ordinary religious art. It is approached as a focus for presence, memory, and prayer. The image is often stylized rather than realistic because it is not trying to impress the eye with natural detail. It is trying to train the gaze. The face may look still. The eyes may feel direct. Gold backgrounds suggest a reality not governed by ordinary time. For believers, the icon points beyond itself. It becomes a window rather than a wall. This is why icon painting follows strict patterns and spiritual preparation. The maker is not simply expressing personal imagination. The maker is participating in a tradition of vision. Some people find icons unsettling because they seem to look back. That effect is part of their power. The viewer is not merely observing. The viewer is being invited into attention, reverence, and self-examination. The image becomes a meeting place. Sacred music can organize emotion into a quieter intelligence. Music reaches people before argument does. A single tone can alter the mood of a room. A melody can gather grief without explaining it. A rhythm can steady a group into shared attention. Spiritual traditions have used this power with great care. Gregorian chant, Vedic recitation, Sufi music, gospel singing, and Buddhist chanting all work differently, yet each recognizes that sound can carry meaning deeper than speech alone. Sacred music does not simply decorate worship, It shapes the emotional field in which worship becomes possible. A person may enter distracted and leave more open, not because they were persuaded, but because emotion found order. Some people believe music reveals mathematical patterns woven into reality. Others say it works because the human body is rhythmic by nature. The heart beats. Breath moves. Steps fall into tempo. Sacred music takes this built-in rhythm and turns it toward the invisible. Feeling becomes disciplined without becoming cold. Incense trains the senses to enter a different mode. Smell is unusually tied to memory. One trace of scent can return a person to childhood, a room, a season, or a ceremony, almost instantly. Spiritual traditions noticed this power and used it deliberately. Incense marks a shift. The air changes, and with it, the mind receives a signal. This is not ordinary time. Pay attention differently. In temples, churches, shrines, and homes, fragrant smoke has accompanied prayer, offering, purification, and remembrance. Some people see the rising smoke as a symbol of devotion. Others experience the scent as a direct doorway into reverence. The body understands before the intellect catches up. That is what makes incense fascinating. It bypasses debate. It creates association through repetition until a single fragrance can summon years of practice. Of course, not everyone responds the same way, and some people avoid smoke for health reasons. Still, the principle remains powerful. The senses can become allies in spiritual attention. Bells mark the moment when ordinary time becomes intentional. A bell can cut through noise without violence. Its sound arrives, expands, and fades. In that fading, attention changes. Many traditions use bells to begin meditation, call worshippers, mark transitions, or announce a sacred moment. The effect is simple, but not shallow. A bell tells the mind to stop drifting. It gives a community one shared signal. In monasteries, the day may be shaped by bells rather than personal preference. In meditation halls, a bell can end silence without breaking it harshly. In temples, the ringing may be understood as an offering or a way to awaken awareness. Some people believe bells clear subtle energy. Others see them as acoustic discipline. Either way, the sound has authority. It does not argue. It calls. The most interesting part may be the silence after the tone disappears. That silence feels changed because attention has been gathered. The bell is gone, yet its instruction remains. Candles make attention visible through one simple flame. A candle is one of the simplest spiritual objects, yet it carries remarkable force. Light appears where darkness had been. A small flame requires care. It can be shared without being diminished. It moves, but it remains itself. These qualities made candles useful in prayer, mourning, celebration, vigil, and remembrance. When a person lights a candle, intention becomes visible. The act says that this moment matters. In many traditions, candles stand before icons, altars, graves, or household shrines. They do not need complicated explanation. The body understands the gesture. Some people are drawn to candle gazing because the flame steadies attention without demanding words. Others find that lighting a candle for someone turns concern into action. The power lies in its modesty. A candle does not overwhelm. It focuses. In a world filled with harsh brightness, one small flame can restore proportion. It teaches that attention becomes stronger when it gathers around one thing. Sacred architecture often teaches by slowing the body down. Many sacred buildings change the speed of a person before changing their thoughts. A doorway may require a pause. A long aisle may slow the walk. A low entrance may make the body bow. A courtyard may create a transition between public life and sacred space. These design choices are not accidental. They teach through movement. The visitor does not merely enter a building. The visitor is reoriented. Ancient designers understood that pace affects perception. Hurry makes the world flat. Slowness allows detail to return. In a cathedral, temple, mosque, or shrine, the body often receives instructions that no one has to say aloud. Lower your voice. Notice the height. Step carefully. Become aware of others. Some people believe such spaces hold energetic patterns. Others focus on craft, acoustics, and symbolism. The result remains compelling. Sacred architecture makes the body participate in reverence. It reminds us that wisdom is not only thought, it is posture, rhythm, and entry. Gardens became spiritual classrooms in several wisdom traditions. A garden teaches without lecturing. It shows that growth requires patience, limits, timing, and care. Many traditions have used gardens as places of contemplation because plants reveal truths that abstract speech can miss. A seed cannot be rushed by anxiety. A neglected path becomes overgrown. A pruned branch may bear more fruit. A dead season may prepare the ground for return. Zen gardens use stone, sand, and emptiness to train attention. Islamic gardens often evoke order, shade, and paradise. Monastic gardens link labor with prayer. Each form carries its own meaning, yet the deeper lesson is shared. Human beings are not separate from cycles of tending. Some people see gardens as miniature worlds where spiritual laws become visible. What you water grows. What you ignore changes without asking permission. What looks dormant may not be dead. In this way, the garden becomes more than a place of beauty. It becomes a patient teacher of inner life. The desert shaped many teachings about dependence and surrender. The desert strips life down to basics with unusual force. Water matters. Shade matters. Direction matters. Pride becomes dangerous when the land does not care about human plans. This is why so many spiritual stories are drawn toward dry places. The desert does not flatter the ego. It teaches dependence quickly. In biblical traditions, wilderness becomes a place of testing, revelation, and purification. In early Christian history, desert monks withdrew into harsh landscapes to confront the noise inside themselves. In Islamic memory, the desert carries deep associations with prophecy, endurance, and trust. Some people believe these places sharpen spiritual perception because the environment removes distraction. There is less to possess, less to perform, and less to hide behind. The landscape asks one question, again and again. What can you rely on when comfort disappears? That question can feel severe, but it can also become liberating. The desert reveals that surrender is not weakness. It is survival with honesty. Mountains often became sacred because they changed human perspective. A mountain alters the human mind before any doctrine is spoken. The climb makes the body humble. The height changes scale. The summit reveals how small personal concerns can look from above. This may be why mountains appear so often in spiritual traditions. Moses receives revelation on Sinai. Shiva is linked with Kailash. Japanese traditions honor Fuji. Greek stories gather around Olympus. Each mountain carries its own meaning, yet the pattern is hard to ignore. People look upward and sense distance from ordinary life. Some believe high places bring the human closer to divine realms. Others think the physical challenge itself creates a state of readiness. Thin air, steep paths, silence, and danger all make attention sharper. A mountain is not merely a backdrop. It becomes a teacher. It says that vision requires ascent. It also says that ascent requires effort. A strange gift of height is that it lets a person see both the world and the self differently. Rivers taught spiritual traditions about renewal and impermanence. A river is never the same river twice, yet it still has a recognizable path. That paradox has fascinated spiritual minds for ages. Rivers cleanse, carry, divide, connect, nourish, and sometimes destroy. They are life-giving, but they refuse to stand still. The Ganges is sacred to millions. The Jordan carries deep meaning in Christian memory. The Nile shaped ancient Egyptian imagination with its cycles of fertility and return. Some people see rivers as living symbols of time itself. You can enter the water, but you cannot freeze the current. This makes rivers powerful teachers of change. A person may try to cling to a moment, a role, or an old identity, but life keeps moving. Ritual bathing often uses water to mark renewal because the body understands what the mind resists. Something is washed. Something is released. Something continues. The river teaches that transformation is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply the truth that everything flows onward. Trees appear in wisdom stories as symbols of rooted growth. Trees carry a rare combination of stillness and change. They remain in one place, yet they are never inactive. Roots move unseen. Rings form slowly. Branches reach toward light. This is why wisdom stories often turn to trees when explaining human growth. The Buddha awakens beneath the Bodhi tree. The tree of life appears in several religious worlds. Norse mythology imagines Yggdrasil as a cosmic tree holding realms together. A tree makes spiritual truth visible without needing argument. It shows patience. It shows nourishment from hidden depths. It shows that strength can be flexible rather than rigid. Some people believe ancient tree reverence preserves a memory of how deeply humans once depended on forests for food, shelter, medicine, and orientation. Others feel something more mysterious in the presence of very old trees. They seem to stand inside time differently. The lesson is simple, but powerful. What grows high must also grow deep. Inner life follows the same law. Fire ceremonies remind communities that transformation has a cost. Fire is never neutral in spiritual imagination. It warms, protects, purifies, consumes, and reveals danger. A flame can cook a meal or destroy a house. That double nature makes it a powerful symbol of transformation. In Vedic ritual, sacred fire carries offerings. In Zoroastrian tradition, fire has been revered as a sign of purity and divine presence. In many cultures, flames accompany rites of passage, mourning, vows, and seasonal renewal. Fire teaches that change is not always gentle. Something must be burned away. That something might be pride, impurity, fear, or an old identity that has outlived its purpose. Some people see fire ceremonies as ways of sending intention into the unseen. Others see them as communal psychology made visible. Either way, the effect can be striking. A group gathers around heat and light. They watch matter become smoke and ash. The message is difficult to avoid. Transformation is real, but it asks for surrender. Water rituals often mark a passage into renewed identity. Across the world, water is used when the person crosses a threshold. A baby is blessed. A convert is baptized. A pilgrim bathes before entering sacred space. A worshipper washes before prayer. The details vary, but the pattern is remarkably persistent. Water tells the body that something is being left behind. It also suggests that a new condition is possible. This is not hard to understand. Water touches the skin directly. It cools, cleans, surrounds, and awakens sensation. A person feels the ritual rather than merely thinking about it. In many traditions, water does not only remove dirt, it carries symbolic weight. It can represent mercy, rebirth, purification, or readiness. Some people believe sacred waters hold special power because of place, prayer, or ancient memory. Others see the force in the act itself. Either way, water speaks in a language older than explanation. It says that identity can be renewed, and the body can help the soul believe it. Seasons gave ancient people a living model of change. Before clocks ruled daily life, the seasons taught time through the body. Cold arrived. Seeds waited. Heat ripened fruit. Leaves fell. These changes were not background scenery. They shaped survival, labor, celebration, and fear. It is no surprise that spiritual traditions watched the seasons closely. They saw birth, maturity, decline, and return written into the year itself. Spring could teach hope. Harvest could teach gratitude. Winter could teach endurance. Autumn could teach release. Some people believe seasonal rituals preserved ancient knowledge about living in rhythm with the earth. Others see them as practical calendars that became sacred through repetition. Both views can be true at once. The astonishing thing is that the seasons give a philosophy of change without a single abstract lecture. Nothing stays. Nothing is wasted. What looks like ending may be preparation. Human beings often resist this truth in personal life. The turning year quietly teaches it again. The night sky made early spirituality impossible to keep small. Imagine looking upward before city lights, telescopes, satellites, or modern explanations. The sky would not feel like decoration. It would feel enormous, ordered, and alive with mystery. Stars returned in patterns. The moon changed shape. Planets wandered differently from fixed lights. Ancient people used the heavens for navigation, calendars, agriculture, ritual, and storytelling. It is easy to see why the sky became spiritually charged. It suggested that human life was part of a vast order. Some traditions read destiny in the stars. Others treated celestial cycles as signs of divine intelligence. Some people today believe ancient sky watchers knew more than modern culture admits. Whether or not one accepts that, their patience was extraordinary. They observed carefully across generations. They connected heaven to time on earth. The result was not only astronomy, it was awe with structure. The night sky expanded the human question. It made people ask whether life below was linked to patterns above. Death awareness has been used to make life more honest. Many spiritual traditions ask people to remember death, not to frighten them, but to sharpen them. When death is hidden, life can become shallow. People postpone love, avoid truth, and waste years protecting images that will not last. Death awareness cuts through that fog. Stoics practiced remembering mortality. Buddhist monks contemplated impermanence. Christian traditions spoke of memento mori. In some cultures, ancestors remained present through ritual memory. The point was not despair. It was clarity. If life is temporary, then attention matters. Speech matters. Forgiveness matters. The use of time matters. Some people avoid this subject because it feels dark. Yet many who face mortality directly describe a strange brightening of priorities. The unnecessary becomes obvious. The essential becomes harder to ignore. Spirituality does not always soften death into comfort. Sometimes it lets death become a stern teacher. The fact of ending can make the present less vague, more precious, and more demanding. Ancestor reverence turns memory into moral responsibility. To honor ancestors is to admit that no one begins alone. A person receives a body, language, customs, wounds, strengths, and unfinished questions from those who came before. Many cultures treat this inheritance with ceremony. Offerings may be made. Names may be spoken. Stories may be preserved. The dead are not treated as vanished from significance. They remain part of the moral field of the living. This can be deeply moving. It can also be demanding. Ancestor reverence asks what we will do with what we have inherited. Will we repeat old harms? Will we repair them? Will we carry forward courage that might otherwise be forgotten? Some people believe ancestors can guide or protect the living. Others understand the practice as memory given sacred form. Either way, it creates a powerful sense of continuity. The self becomes less isolated. Life becomes a link in a chain. To remember well is not nostalgia. It is responsibility. The Dalai Lama teaches compassion as a practical human skill. What makes the Dalai Lama's teaching so widely accessible is its simplicity without shallowness. Compassion is not presented as a decoration for religious people. It is treated as a skill that protects the mind and improves human life. This is important because compassion often sounds soft until it is tested. Remaining kind during conflict is difficult. Seeing another person's pain without being swallowed by it takes practice. The Dalai Lama repeatedly connects inner training with everyday conduct. A smile, a restrained word, a sincere concern for another person's suffering, these become spiritual acts that anyone can attempt. Some people are struck by how practical this is. The teaching does not require a person to accept every part of Tibetan Buddhism before beginning. It asks them to notice that every human being wants less suffering. From that recognition, ethics becomes personal. Compassion stops being an idea for saints. It becomes a daily discipline for ordinary life. Rumi made longing feel like a doorway into understanding. Rumi's appeal is strange and powerful because he does not treat longing as mere sadness. He treats it as evidence that the human heart knows it is incomplete. In his world, the ache itself can point toward the beloved, toward God, toward a deeper reality that ordinary satisfaction cannot replace. This is why his words still reach people across cultures and centuries. He takes the feeling of missing something and gives it spiritual dignity. Longing becomes a kind of intelligence. It tells a person not to settle too quickly. It turns heartbreak, desire, and restlessness into signs that the soul is being pulled beyond its small arrangements. Some people read Rumi romantically. Others read him mystically. The deeper power may be that both levels meet. Human love becomes a school for divine love. The wound becomes an opening. What feels like absence may secretly be a form of guidance. That is why his voice remains so alive. Lao Tzu warned that control often creates the disorder it fears. Lao Tzu's wisdom can feel like a direct challenge to modern life. We assume more force creates better results. More rules. More pressure. More intervention. Yet the Tao Te Ching often suggests that excessive control can disturb the natural order of things. A leader who meddles too much creates resistance. A person who grasps too tightly loses sensitivity. A culture that glorifies domination may forget how life actually moves. This is not a call for chaos. It is a call for deep responsiveness. The sage acts without needless strain. The wise person knows when not to interfere. That idea sounds simple until you try it. The ego loves control because control feels like safety. Lao Tzu asks whether that safety is sometimes an illusion. Some people hear in his teaching a forgotten political philosophy. Others hear a manual for the nervous system. Stop forcing reality into your preferred shape, and hidden intelligence may begin to function again. Marcus Aurelius practiced spiritual discipline inside political responsibility. Marcus Aurelius was not writing from a retreat. He was ruling an empire, facing war, plague, betrayal, exhaustion, and the burden of command. That makes his private notes so compelling. They show a man trying to remain decent while surrounded by pressure. His spiritual discipline was not built on escaping duty. It was built on remembering what kind of person he wanted to be while duty pressed on him. He reminded himself that fame fades, anger wastes the soul, and other people's faults do not excuse our own. There is something almost startling about that. One of the most powerful men in the world kept telling himself to be humble, patient, and just. Some people are drawn to his writings because they feel like midnight conversations with conscience. There is no performance in them. He was not trying to impress an audience. He was trying to govern himself. That may be the hardest empire of all. Hildegard of Bingen joined vision, healing, and music with rare courage. Hildegard of Bingen lived in the medieval world, yet her range still feels astonishing. She was a religious leader, composer, writer, and visionary who described powerful inner experiences with unusual confidence. Her music has an otherworldly quality to many listeners because it stretches beyond ordinary melodic expectations. Her writings connect the human body, the natural world, morality, and divine life in a way that feels both ancient and surprisingly holistic. What makes her especially fascinating is that she spoke with authority in a time when women were often denied public intellectual power. She corresponded with influential figures and challenged corruption when she believed truth required it. Some people see her as a mystic ahead of her time. Others see her as proof that spiritual vision can produce cultural force. She did not keep her inner life private and harmless. She turned it into songs, teachings, counsel, and warning. Her legacy shows that contemplation can become creative courage. Thich Nhat Hanh made mindfulness sound simple without making it shallow. Thich Nhat Hanh had a rare gift for making profound practice feel immediately usable. He could take an ordinary act, such as walking, breathing, drinking tea, or washing dishes, and reveal it as a doorway into presence. This simplicity was not watered down. It came from deep training and immense moral seriousness. He lived through war and exile, yet he kept teaching that peace begins in the way we handle the present moment. That claim can sound gentle, but it is demanding. It means anger must be met in the body. Speech must be chosen carefully. Attention must return again and again. His teaching helped bring mindfulness to a global audience because it did not require people to abandon daily life. It asked them to inhabit daily life more fully. Some people find that radical. The path is not elsewhere. It is in the next breath, the next step, and the next chance not to harm. Teresa of Avila described the inner life with remarkable psychological depth. Teresa of Avila wrote about prayer as if the soul had rooms, thresholds, struggles, and hidden chambers. Her famous image of the interior castle gives shape to an inward journey that many people would otherwise find impossible to describe. She understood distraction, self-deception, fear, longing, and the strange difficulty of surrender. What makes her work so fascinating is its combination of mystical intensity and practical intelligence. She could speak of union with God, then immediately warn against foolishness, vanity, or spiritual confusion. She knew that inner experiences required discernment. Not every feeling is divine. Not every enthusiasm is wisdom. In the time of religious tension, she became a reformer who moved through resistance with extraordinary determination. Some people read her as a saint. Others read her as a brilliant observer of consciousness. Either way, she shows that the spiritual path is not vague. It has stages, dangers, surprises, and a demanding honesty. Ramana Maharshi used one question to challenge personal identity. Ramana Maharshi's teaching is famous for its directness. Instead of building a complicated system, he asked seekers to investigate the sense of I. Who is the one who suffers? Who is the one who thinks? Who is the one who seeks liberation? This question sounds simple, but it can become explosive when pursued seriously. Most people never examine the feeling of being a separate self. They simply live from it. Ramana turned attention back toward that route. He did not ask people to adopt a new identity. He asked them to look for the one they were already defending. Some people see this as one of the most radical spiritual methods ever offered. It does not chase visions or powers. It questions the seeker. If the personal self cannot be found as a solid thing, then what remains? For Ramana, the answer was not an idea. It was silent awareness itself, recognized as the deepest reality. Confucius treated ordinary conduct as the foundation of spiritual life. Confucius did not build his teaching around escape from society. He focused on how people behave inside relationships. The family, the ruler, the student, the friend, and the elder all became part of moral formation. This can seem less mystical than visions or meditation, but it is deeply serious. Confucius understood that character is revealed in everyday conduct. How do you speak to your parents? How do you honor a promise? How do you correct yourself after failure? How do you act when no ceremony is watching? Ritual mattered to him because it trained respect. Learning mattered because it shaped judgment. Humaneness mattered because society collapses when people forget mutual obligation. Some people underestimate this tradition because it appears practical. That is exactly its force. It says the sacred is not only found in rare experiences. It is found in the repeated discipline of becoming trustworthy. A life well-ordered in conduct becomes a spiritual achievement. The Buddha turned observation into a path of liberation. The Buddha's genius was to look directly at experience and refuse to look away. He observed that feelings change, thoughts change, bodies change, and identities change. He saw that clinging to what changes creates suffering. From that observation came an entire path. Meditation was not a decoration. Ethics was not a social rule only. Wisdom was not theory. Each part worked together to free the mind from ignorance and craving. The astonishing thing is how practical the path remains. Sit, notice, speak carefully, act with restraint. Watch the mind create pain. Watch pain lose some of its authority when it is understood. Some people see the Buddha as a spiritual physician because his teaching has diagnosis, cause, cure, and treatment. Others see him as an investigator of consciousness. Either way, his revolution was quiet but immense. He showed that liberation might begin not by believing more, but by seeing more accurately than before. Socrates made self-examination a sacred duty of the mind. Socrates walked through Athens asking questions that disturbed confident people. He wanted to know what justice was, what courage was, what goodness was, and whether people truly understood the words they used. His method could feel irritating, but it carried a deep moral purpose. He believed an unexamined life was not worthy of a human being. That is a spiritual claim, even when framed philosophically. It means the mind has a duty to test itself. We should not merely inherit opinions, repeat fashionable answers, or hide behind reputation. Socrates accepted death rather than abandon the calling to question. That fact gives his life unusual force. He did not treat philosophy as entertainment. He treated it as fidelity to truth. Some people see him as a martyr of reason. Others see him as a kind of secular mystic of conscience. His legacy remains dangerous because it asks us to examine the beliefs that make us comfortable. Plotinus described the soul as returning toward its source. Plotinus imagined reality as flowing from the One, a principle beyond ordinary description. From that source comes intellect, soul, and the world of visible forms. The spiritual task is not merely to behave well. It is to return inward and upward toward the origin of being. This vision became one of the great mystical philosophies of the ancient world. It influenced later Christian, Islamic, and Jewish thinkers in subtle and powerful ways. What makes Plotinus fascinating is his sense that the soul has forgotten its own depth. It has become fascinated by the outer world, yet it carries a longing for the source from which it came. Beauty can awaken that memory. Contemplation can refine it. Virtue can prepare the ascent. Some people read him and feel that philosophy has become a map of homesickness. The soul is not trapped because matter is evil. It is distracted from its highest identity. The return begins when attention turns toward its origin. Meister Eckhart taught that letting go could become spiritual depth. Meister Eckhart is one of the most daring voices in Christian mysticism. He spoke about detachment not as emotional numbness, but as radical openness to God. The soul, in his teaching, must become free from possessiveness, self-will, and even spiritual vanity. This is startling because many people cling not only to pleasures, but also to their ideas of holiness. Eckhart warned that the ego can turn religion into another possession. Letting go, therefore, reaches deeper than giving up things. It means releasing the need to own the spiritual life itself. Some people find his language almost shocking because it pushes beyond conventional piety into a bare encounter with divine reality. He suggests that the ground of the soul meets the ground of God in a depth beyond ordinary images. Whether one reads him devotionally or philosophically, his challenge is severe. Do not use spirituality to decorate the self. Empty the self enough for truth to enter. Rabia of Basra made love stronger than fear in devotion. Rabia of Basra stands as one of the most luminous figures in early Sufi memory. Her devotion is remembered for a startling purity. She is said to have loved God not for reward and not from fear of punishment, but for God alone. That idea changes the entire emotional structure of religion. It asks whether devotion can move beyond bargaining. Many people obey because they want safety. Others obey because they fear consequence. Rabia's path points to something more refined. Love becomes the motive, not the prize. This does not make the path sentimental. It makes it demanding. To love without calculation is difficult because the ego constantly asks what it will receive. Rabia's legacy continues to fascinate because it strips spirituality down to intention. Why do we pray? Why do we serve? Why do we seek? If the answer is only reward, the heart remains a merchant. Rabia asks whether it can become a lover. Shankara argued that ultimate reality is not divided. Shankara became one of the great voices of Advaita Vedanta, a tradition that teaches non-duality. The central claim is staggering. At the deepest level, the self and ultimate reality are not separate. The world of difference is experienced, but it is not final truth. This does not mean daily life simply vanishes or that moral action does not matter. It means ordinary perception may mistake appearance for the whole of reality. Shankara used reasoning, scripture, and disciplined inquiry to point beyond the sense of separation. Some people compare this to waking from a dream, not because the dream has no experience, but because its status changes when one awakens. The fascination lies in how radical the teaching is. The seeker looks for God as if God were elsewhere. Shankara says the deepest truth is closer than the seeker's own thought. Ignorance creates distance. Knowledge removes the illusion. What remains is not two. Zhuangzi used strange stories to loosen rigid thinking. Zhuangzi is one of the most delightful and disruptive voices in Taoist thought. His stories often seem playful, absurd, or dreamlike, but they are carefully designed to unsettle fixed assumptions. A man dreams he is a butterfly, and then wonders whether he is a butterfly dreaming he is a man. A useless tree survives because no one wants to cut it down. A skilled butcher moves through an ox with effortless precision because he follows the natural spaces. These tales do not lecture in a straight line. They bend the mind. Zhuangzi wants readers to question certainty, social ambition, and narrow judgments about usefulness. Some people see him as a philosopher of freedom. Others see him as a master of spiritual mischief. His method is unforgettable because it does not merely argue against rigidity. It makes rigidity feel ridiculous. The reader laughs, then notices the trap. Perhaps the world is wider than our categories. Perhaps wisdom begins when certainty relaxes. Simone Weil saw attention as one of the purest prayers. Simone Weil's life and thought were intense, uncompromising, and difficult to categorize. She believed that attention was not just mental focus. It was a moral and spiritual act. To truly attend to another person is to stop using them as scenery in your own story. It is to let their reality matter. This idea is simple enough to understand and almost impossible to practice perfectly. Weil saw attention in study, suffering, compassion, and prayer. She believed the soul must become receptive rather than possessive. In a world addicted to distraction, her insight feels more urgent than ever. Some people are fascinated by her because she stood at the border of philosophy, politics, and mysticism without fitting comfortably anywhere. She did not make spirituality easy. She made it exacting. Attention, for her, was a form of humility. It required waiting without grabbing. It asked the self to step aside long enough for truth, or another person, to appear. Gandhi turned spiritual discipline into public moral force. Gandhi's politics cannot be understood apart from his spiritual experiments. He treated truth, self-restraint, prayer, fasting, and non-violence as powers that could act in history. This was a bold claim. It suggested that disciplined conscience could confront empire without becoming a mirror of its violence. Satyagraha, often understood as holding firmly to truth, was not passive weakness. It required courage, organization, sacrifice, and the willingness to suffer without hatred. Gandhi's life was complex, and not every choice he made escapes criticism. Yet his central experiment remains astonishing. He brought spiritual practice into public struggle and forced the world to notice moral pressure as a real force. Some people see his method as political strategy. Others see it as applied spirituality. The two are inseparable in his legacy. He asked whether inner discipline could change outer power. That question still matters. A person may begin with private conscience, but conscience can become history when it is organized. Thomas Merton found contemplation inside a noisy modern century. Thomas Merton became a monk in an age of machines, war, advertising, and accelerating noise. That contrast gives his life unusual relevance. He entered a Trappist monastery seeking silence, yet his writings reached millions outside the cloister. He showed that contemplation was not a relic from another age. It was a necessary response to modern fragmentation. Merton wrote about prayer, solitude, conscience, interfaith dialogue, and the dangers of a false self built for performance. His voice appeals to many people because he was not detached from the world's pain. He wrestled with racism, violence, technology, and spiritual pride. The monk in silence became a critic of noise in all its forms. Some people see him as a bridge between ancient contemplative practice and modern searching. His life suggests that withdrawal does not have to mean indifference. Sometimes stepping back allows a person to see more clearly. In a distracted century, contemplation became an act of resistance. Paramahansa Yogananda brought yogic spirituality to millions of Western readers. Paramahansa Yogananda helped introduce yoga as a spiritual path to a vast Western audience. His autobiography of a yogi became one of the most influential spiritual books of the 20th century. Readers encountered gurus, meditation, devotion, subtle energy, and stories that seemed to stretch the boundaries of ordinary possibility. For many, the book opened a door into Indian spirituality at a time when the West was still largely unfamiliar with it. Yogananda taught Kriya Yoga as a method for inner realization, and he presented the search for God as something experiential rather than merely inherited. Some people are drawn to the more extraordinary stories around him. Others focus on the practical discipline of meditation and moral living. Either way, his influence is enormous. He gave seekers a vision of spirituality that felt ancient, personal, and universal. He also helped shift the meaning of yoga in the modern imagination. It was not only posture, it was a path toward awakening. Modern mindfulness entered hospitals before many people entered monasteries. A strange thing happened in the modern world. A practice once associated with monks, retreat centers, and ancient discipline began appearing in clinics, pain programs, therapy rooms, and medical research. Many people first encountered mindfulness not through a sacred text, but through a doctor, a counselor, or a stress reduction course. That shift is fascinating because it changed the public face of meditation. It became less about joining a religion and more about learning how attention affects suffering. A patient with chronic pain might be taught to notice sensation without immediately adding panic. A stressed worker might learn to observe thoughts before obeying them. Some people see this as a useful adaptation. Others wonder whether something deep was lost when ancient practice was translated into modern health language. Either way, the movement reveals a powerful truth. The mind is not separate from the body's distress. Attention can become medicine, even when no one calls it spiritual. Neuroscience now studies meditation without needing to settle metaphysics. Modern researchers can place meditators in scanners, measure attention, track stress responses, and study changes in the brain. They do not have to prove every ancient spiritual claim before asking whether practice affects the nervous system. That makes the meeting between meditation and neuroscience unusually interesting. One world speaks of liberation, awareness, and awakening. The other speaks of networks, plasticity, and regulation. They are not saying the same thing, but they are looking toward the same human mystery from different angles. Some people become excited by this because it feels like old inner maps are finally being tested with new instruments. Others warn that brain images cannot capture the full meaning of a spiritual life. Both cautions matter. A scan may show activity, but it cannot measure humility. It may detect attention, but it cannot prove wisdom. Still, the research has changed the conversation. Ancient practice is no longer only believed or dismissed. It is being investigated. Psychology increasingly recognizes meaning as central to human resilience. For a long time, modern life often treated survival, productivity, and comfort as enough. Yet people can have those things and still feel hollow. Psychology has increasingly taken meaning seriously because human beings endure hardship differently when suffering is connected to purpose. A difficult task becomes bearable when it serves love. A painful memory can become less destructive when it is integrated into a larger story. A loss may never stop hurting, but it can deepen compassion or clarify priorities. This is where spirituality and psychology begin to speak closely. Both ask how a person makes sense of being alive. Some people are drawn to meaning because it cannot be reduced to pleasure. It asks for direction. It asks for values. It asks what kind of life is worthy of our limited time. Resilience is not merely toughness. A stone is tough. Human resilience often grows when the soul knows why it is standing. Trauma-informed spirituality asks whether practices feel safe in the body. A practice can be ancient, beautiful, and still feel overwhelming to someone whose nervous system has learned danger too well. This realization has changed modern spiritual care. Some people close their eyes to meditate and meet panic instead of peace. Others sit in silence and feel trapped rather than free. Trauma-informed spirituality does not dismiss the practice. It asks whether the body can receive it safely. That question matters. A person may need open eyes, movement, shorter sessions, trusted guidance, or grounding before deep stillness. This approach challenges the idea that one method is good for everyone at every time. It also restores compassion to discipline. The aim is not to force vulnerability. The aim is to help the person rebuild trust with their own experience. Some people see this as a major correction to spiritual culture. Healing cannot be measured by how much discomfort someone can endure. Real practice must respect the body's history. Digital life makes ancient attention training unexpectedly relevant again. The modern phone is a small object with enormous power. It can interrupt prayer, shorten patience, reward outrage, and turn boredom into something people no longer know how to survive. Ancient teachers never saw a glowing screen, yet they understood distraction with remarkable clarity. They warned that the mind chases novelty, clings to stimulation, and forgets itself through constant input. That makes attention training feel newly urgent. Meditation, Sabbath, chanting, reading sacred texts, and mindful breathing now stand against an economy designed to capture the eyes. Some people believe the greatest spiritual battle of our era is not against disbelief. It is against fragmentation. A person may not reject wisdom. They may simply be too distracted to receive it. This is why old practices can feel futuristic. They train what digital life weakens. They return ownership of attention to the one who is living. In a distracted age, focus becomes a form of freedom. Burnout has made rest feel like a spiritual rebellion. Many people now live as if exhaustion proves worth. They answer messages late, measure identity through output, and feel guilty when nothing is being achieved. Against that background, rest begins to sound almost subversive. Spiritual traditions have long warned that endless striving deforms the soul. Sabbath, retreat, prayer, stillness, and contemplative pauses all challenge the idea that human value comes from productivity. Burnout exposes the lie by making success feel lifeless. The body refuses to continue a story the mind kept defending. Some people discover spirituality only after ambition breaks their peace. Rest then becomes more than recovery. It becomes a correction. It says the person is not a machine. It says time is not only a container for tasks. It says the world will not collapse if the ego stops performing for a while. In that sense, true rest can feel radical. It interrupts the empire of hurry and lets being matter again. Minimalism echoes old teachings about freedom from excess. Modern minimalism often appears as clean rooms, simple wardrobes, and careful purchasing. Beneath the style, however, is an older spiritual question. How much do we own before our possessions begin owning us? Monks, sages, hermits, and renunciants asked this long before the language of lifestyle design existed. They saw that excess does not only fill houses, it fills attention. Every object can carry maintenance, desire, comparison, memory, or anxiety. Simplicity can therefore become a form of mental clearing. This does not mean everyone must live with almost nothing. It means the relationship to things deserves examination. Some people reduce belongings and discover grief. Others discover relief. Others realize they were using consumption to avoid silence. The fascination of minimalism is not the empty shelf. It is the question behind it. What remains when display loses authority? Old wisdom says freedom is not having nothing. It is needing less to feel whole. Environmental spirituality returns moral attention to the living world. Modern ecological concern often uses data, policy, and warning. Environmental spirituality adds another layer. It asks what kind of relationship humans have with the earth. Is the world merely material for extraction, or is it a living community that deserves reverence? This question changes the emotional ground of responsibility. A forest is no longer just a resource. An animal is no longer just a category. A coastline is no longer only scenery for human pleasure. Many traditions have carried this sense for generations, and modern seekers are rediscovering it under pressure. Some people speak of the earth as sacred. Others avoid that language but still feel the moral seriousness of interdependence. The result is a different kind of care. It is not only fear of collapse. It is loyalty to what gives life. Spirituality here becomes practical, not sentimental. It asks whether reverence can change behavior before loss becomes irreversible. Interfaith dialogue shows how wisdom can travel without becoming identical. When traditions meet honestly, something more interesting than agreement can happen. People discover that wisdom can cross boundaries while still keeping its own shape. A Buddhist and a Christian may both value compassion, yet understand ultimate reality differently. A Muslim and a Hindu may both honor devotion, yet pray within distinct worlds of meaning. Good dialogue does not flatten these differences. It listens carefully enough to let them remain real. This matters because shallow tolerance often says everything is basically the same. Serious encounter says something richer. We are not the same, and still we may learn. Some people are drawn to interfaith conversations because they feel like hidden tunnels between civilizations. Others fear that exchange weakens commitment. It can, if handled carelessly, but at its best, it deepens humility. A person sees their own tradition more clearly when another tradition asks different questions. Wisdom travels best when it is received with respect, not swallowed whole. Secular spirituality keeps wonder while stepping outside formal religion. Many people today do not belong to a religious institution, yet they still feel drawn to awe, meaning, ethics, and inner transformation. Secular spirituality grows in that space. It may involve meditation, nature, service, philosophy, art, or contemplation, but it does not always use the language of God. This can confuse people who assume spirituality requires formal belief, yet the longing underneath is recognizable. A person wants depth without pretending certainty. They want reverence without entering a system they cannot honestly accept. Some see this as a loss of tradition. Others see it as a sign that the spiritual instinct survives even when old structures weaken. The challenge is seriousness. Without a tradition, a person can drift into personal preference and call it wisdom. But secular spirituality can also become thoughtful, disciplined, and ethically demanding. Its great question is clear. Can a life remain sacred in feeling, even when the sacred is not named in the old way? The placebo effect reveals how belief can influence lived experience. The placebo effect is one of the strangest facts in modern healing. A person may improve after receiving something inactive because expectation, trust, meaning, and context affect the body's response. This does not mean every illness is imaginary. It means the border between mind and body is more mysterious than everyday thinking admits. Spiritual traditions have always taken belief seriously, not only as an idea, but as a force that changes experience. A blessing, a ritual, a healer's presence, or a sacred object may work partly through the deep human capacity to respond to meaning. Some people push this idea too far and blame the sick for not believing enough. That is both cruel and unwise. The more fascinating view is humbler. Human beings are meaning-responsive creatures. What we trust can alter what we feel. What we expect can shape what we endure. The placebo effect does not explain spirituality away. It makes the human being more astonishing. Awe can make personal problems feel less absolute. Awe changes scale. A person standing under a vast sky, hearing a great choir, seeing ancient ruins, or holding a newborn may suddenly feel smaller in a healing way. The problem does not vanish, but it no longer occupies the entire universe. This is why spiritual traditions preserve awe through architecture, chant, pilgrimage, scripture, ceremony, and contemplation. Awe interrupts the tyranny of the private self. It reminds us that reality is larger than the current worry. Some people seek awe in nature. Others find it in mathematics, silence, art, or devotion. The doorway varies, but the effect is often recognizable. The mind loosens. The heart becomes less cramped. Time feels wider. Even grief can be held differently when a person senses they are part of something vast. Modern culture often shrinks attention into personal drama. Awe reverses that shrinking. It does not make life easy. It makes life larger than the trouble inside it. Breathwork shows that the nervous system listens to rhythm. The body is not waiting for philosophy before it responds. It listens to pace, pressure, posture, and breath. That is why breathwork can feel so immediate. A few minutes of fast breathing may energize or unsettle. Slow breathing may signal safety. A long exhale can soften tension. Ancient practices recognized this in spiritual language, while modern approaches often describe the same terrain through the nervous system. Both point to a fascinating truth. Conscious breathing can become a lever between instinct and awareness. Some people use breathwork for focus. Others use it for emotional release. Others treat it as a doorway into altered states. It should be approached carefully, especially by those with medical concerns, but its power is hard to dismiss. The breath is not only air moving in and out. It is a rhythm but the body trusts. Change the rhythm, and experience may change with it. Journaling can turn confusion into a teachable inner conversation. A thought inside the head can feel enormous until it is written down. On the page, it becomes something that can be seen, questioned, and answered. This is why journaling has become a modern spiritual practice for many people, even when they do not call it that. It creates a private room where the mind can reveal its patterns. A person may notice the same fear repeating in different disguises. They may discover resentment beneath fatigue. They may find that a decision becomes clearer once it is spoken honestly in ink. Spiritual traditions have long valued confession, examination, and self-reflection. Journaling gives those practices a simple modern form. Some people use it to record gratitude. Others track dreams, prayers, synchronicities, or moral failures. The method can be plain or strange. The value lies in honest attention. Writing slows thought enough for wisdom to enter. The page becomes a witness that does not interrupt. Solitude reveals which thoughts belong to the crowd. When a person is always surrounded by voices, it becomes difficult to know what they truly think. Opinions are absorbed from family, media, friends, trends, and fear of rejection. Solitude interrupts that borrowing. At first, it can feel empty or uncomfortable. Then the borrowed voices begin to separate from the deeper ones. A person may realize they wanted something only because it was admired. They may discover a belief they have never tested. They may feel grief that constant activity had kept hidden. Spiritual traditions value solitude because it restores the possibility of inner honesty. A hermit in a cave and a modern person turning off notifications are not the same, yet both are asking for space from the crowd. Some people fear solitude because it exposes loneliness. Others seek it as a doorway into freedom. The essential lesson remains sharp. Until the noise recedes, we may be living by scripts we never consciously chose. Community protects spirituality from becoming private fantasy. A person alone can mistake any strong feeling for revelation. They can also avoid correction while calling it freedom. This is why community matters. A healthy spiritual community gives practice a place to be tested. Kindness must survive real people. Patience must survive disagreement. Humility must survive being wrong in public. Without community, spirituality can become a private movie in which the self is always the hero. With community, ideals meet inconvenience. That can be uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Traditions use teachers, elders, companions, liturgy, shared work, and moral expectations to keep seekers grounded. Of course, communities can become unhealthy. Authority can be misused. Group identity can replace truth. So discernment is essential. Yet the need remains. Human beings are relational creatures. A wisdom that cannot handle other people may not be wisdom yet. Community can save spirituality from becoming self-hypnosis. It reminds the seeker that awakening must become visible in conduct. Service tests whether inner peace can survive real need. It is easy to feel peaceful when no one is asking anything of us. Service changes that. It brings spirituality into contact with hunger, illness, loneliness, injustice, and inconvenience. A person may discover that their serenity was partly protected by distance. This is why service appears in so many wisdom traditions. It prevents the inner life from becoming a private luxury. Serving another person requires attention beyond personal mood. It may involve washing dishes, visiting the sick, giving money, listening carefully, teaching a child, or repairing harm. These actions do not always feel exalted. That is the point. Real need is not arranged for our inspiration. Some people use service to feel superior, and traditions warn against that trap. True service humbles the server. It reveals impatience, fear, judgment, and hidden selfishness. It also reveals love in practical form. Inner peace becomes credible when it can bend toward another person's burden without breaking. Ethics keep spiritual power from becoming self-importance. Spiritual experiences can be intoxicating. A person may feel expanded, chosen, unusually aware, or filled with special insight. Without ethics, those feelings can become dangerous. This is why serious traditions surround spiritual practice with moral training. Truthfulness, restraint, humility, compassion, and responsibility are not boring rules beside the real mystery. They are safeguards. A person who seeks power without ethics may use spiritual language to dominate others. They may confuse charisma with wisdom. They may treat intensity as proof of authority. History contains many warnings about this. Some people are fascinated by hidden knowledge, esoteric practice, and extraordinary states. The older teachings often say, first become trustworthy. Ethics ground the seeker in ordinary decency. They protect others from manipulation. They protect the seeker from inflation. A profound vision means little if it makes someone cruel. Spiritual power is safest when it is yoked to character. Otherwise, the sacred becomes another costume for the ego. Discernment matters because not every intense experience is wisdom. Intensity can fool people. A dream, a vision, a rush of emotion, a coincidence, or a sudden certainty may feel deeply meaningful. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is fear, desire, stress, imagination, or wishful thinking wearing sacred clothing. Discernment is the art of telling the difference. Wisdom traditions develop tests for this reason. Does the experience make a person kinder? Does it increase humility? Does it survive time? Does it lead to responsible action? Does it isolate the person from correction? These questions matter because spiritual seeking opens powerful psychological doors. Some people chase signs everywhere and lose their balance. Others dismiss everything unusual and miss genuine insight. Discernment walks between those mistakes. It does not mock mystery. It does not worship every inner event. It waits, examines, and measures fruit. The most fascinating experiences are not always the truest ones. Sometimes real wisdom arrives without fireworks, and deception arrives dressed as revelation. Healthy doubt can protect the soul from blind certainty. Doubt is often treated as the enemy of faith, but it can also be a form of care. A person who never questions may become easy to manipulate. They may mistake confidence for truth. They may surrender conscience to whoever speaks with enough authority. Healthy doubt slows that process. It asks whether an idea produces compassion, honesty, and freedom. It asks whether a teacher welcomes examination or fears it. It asks whether a practice deepens life or merely creates dependency. This kind of doubt does not have to be cynical. It can be reverent. It respects truth enough to test appearances. Many traditions contain their own internal forms of questioning. Saints, sages, and philosophers have wrestled with uncertainty because serious faith is not always simple. Some people fear doubt because it may change them. That is exactly why it matters. Blind certainty closes the mind too early. Doubt keeps the door open until wisdom can enter. Spiritual bypassing uses beautiful ideas to avoid necessary pain. Spiritual language can heal, but it can also hide. A person may speak of peace while refusing to confront anger. They may talk about destiny while avoiding responsibility. They may say everything happens for a reason before allowing grief to speak honestly. This is spiritual bypassing. It uses elevated ideas to move around wounds that need attention. The danger is subtle because the words can sound wise. Forgive. Let go. Trust. Rise above. Each phrase can be true in the right moment, yet harmful when used too soon. Some people learn this the hard way when unresolved pain returned through the body, relationships, or repeated patterns. Real spirituality does not ask a person to deny their humanity. It asks them to bring consciousness into it. Tears may be part of the path. Therapy may be part of the path. Difficult conversations may be part of the path. The shortcut around pain often circles back to the same door. True practice usually makes people kinder in ordinary situations. Grand claims mean little if a person becomes harsher at home. Spiritual maturity shows itself in small settings because that is where character stops performing. How does someone speak when they are tired? How do they treat a waiter, a child, a difficult relative, or a stranger who cannot help them? Do they become more patient with imperfection? Do they listen better? Do they admit fault sooner? These questions reveal more than dramatic experiences. Many traditions judge practice by its fruit. A tree is known by what it produces. If meditation makes someone proud, something has gone wrong. If prayer makes someone contemptuous, the prayer has not reached the heart. This does not mean advanced practitioners are flawless. It means the direction should be visible. The sacred should make ordinary life more humane. Kindness is not a decorative virtue. It is evidence. The real test of spirituality is often found in the next conversation. The body is often the first place wisdom becomes honest. The mind can invent impressive explanations, but the body often tells the truth sooner. A tight chest may reveal fear before a person admits it. Exhaustion may expose resentment beneath constant helpfulness. A clenched jaw may know about anger that polite language hides. Spiritual traditions sometimes speak as if the body is an obstacle, yet many also understand it as a source of information. Bowing, breathing, fasting, dancing, kneeling, walking, and chanting all involve the body, because transformation cannot remain only mental. Modern somatic approaches have made this even clearer. Experience is stored, signaled, and released through physical life. Some people are surprised when an insight arrives not during analysis, but after a deep breath or a long walk. The body is not merely carrying the soul like luggage. It is participating in wisdom. To ignore it is to miss part of the truth. Honest spirituality listens to the body without letting impulse rule. Rest can reveal what ambition tries to conceal. Ambition keeps a person moving, and movement can hide many things. A crowded schedule can conceal loneliness. Constant goals can cover uncertainty. Achievement can distract from a fear of being ordinary. When rest finally arrives, the hidden material often rises. This is why some people find stillness uncomfortable. They expected peace, but met themselves. Spiritual traditions value rest not only because it restores strength, but because it interrupts the performance of endless striving. Without the next task, a person may begin to ask why they were running so hard. Were they serving a true calling or escaping an inner question? Were they building something meaningful or trying to become undeniable? These are not easy inquiries. Rest makes them possible. Some people discover that ambition was carrying genuine purpose. Others discover it was carrying fear in a fine suit. Either discovery matters. When the machinery stops, the soul can finally be heard without the applause of productivity. Attention is the doorway through which every practice must pass. No spiritual practice can work without attention. A prayer spoken while the mind is elsewhere remains thin. A ritual performed mechanically loses force. A scripture read without presence becomes sound without nourishment. A kind act done without awareness may still help, but it may not transform the doer. Attention is the hidden ingredient. It turns action into practice. This is why traditions guard the mind so carefully. They create times, spaces, sounds, postures, and habits that gather scattered awareness into one place. Some people search for exotic methods, secret symbols, or rare teachings. Yet the most basic doorway is always the same. Can you actually be present for what you are doing? That question is simple and almost impossible. Modern life trains divided attention. Spiritual practice trains returned attention. Each return matters. It says the life being lived is worthy of being noticed. Without attention, wisdom remains outside the door. With attention, ordinary moments begin to open. Meaning deepens when a person lives by chosen values. Meaning is not found only by thinking about life. It grows when values become action. A person may say they value honesty, but meaning deepens when they tell the truth under pressure. They may value compassion, but meaning deepens when they help at a cost. They may value courage, but meaning deepens when fear does not get the final vote. Chosen values turn existence into a path. Without them, life can become reaction, imitation, or drift. Spiritual traditions often provide values through commandments, vows, virtues, or communal duties. Modern seekers may need to name their values consciously because inherited structures no longer guide everyone. That freedom is powerful, but it is demanding. A value is not a slogan. It is a direction that asks for sacrifice. Some people discover meaning by asking what they are willing to suffer for. The answer reveals what is sacred to them. A life becomes coherent when choices begin to serve what matters. Surrender often means cooperating with reality before trying to change it. Surrender is easily misunderstood as giving up. In deeper practice, it often means stopping the war against what is already true. A diagnosis has arrived. A relationship has ended. A mistake has been made. A season has changed. Before wise action can begin, reality must be admitted. Resistance wastes energy by arguing with facts. Surrender gathers that energy and returns it to response. This does not make a person passive. It makes them accurate. Many traditions teach surrender because the ego prefers fantasy when truth feels painful. It wants a different past, a different body, a different personality, a different world. Some people spend years exhausting themselves this way. When surrender comes, it may feel like defeat at first. Then it becomes relief. The situation may still require courage and effort, but the inner struggle changes. One stops pushing against the locked door and looks for the door that can open. Cooperation with reality becomes the first act of wisdom. Inner freedom grows when identity becomes less defensive. A defensive identity must constantly protect itself. It needs agreement, praise, victory, and confirmation. It feels threatened by criticism because criticism seems like annihilation. Spiritual practice loosens this burden by helping a person become less fused with every label and story. You can have a role without being trapped inside it. You can have a belief without making it a weapon. You can have a past without letting it write every future response. This is not weakness. It is flexibility. A less defensive person can listen longer. They can apologize faster. They can change without feeling destroyed. Some traditions describe this as reducing ego. Modern psychology might describe it as expanding self-awareness. Either way, the result is freedom. The person no longer has to patrol the border of the self every moment. They can meet life with more space. Identity remains useful, but it stops acting like a frightened guard. That is a quieter kind of strength. Spiritual maturity is measured by presence during ordinary moments. The final test is rarely dramatic. It is not only what happens during retreat, ceremony, crisis, or inspiration. It is how a person inhabits breakfast, traffic, work, waiting, cleaning, listening, and silence. Ordinary moments reveal whether practice has become part of the nervous system. Can a person drink tea without rushing toward the next task? Can they listen without preparing a performance? Can they do necessary work without resentment poisoning every movement? Spiritual maturity makes presence less dependent on special conditions. This is why many teachers return students to simple acts. Sweep the floor, wash the bowl, greet the neighbor. Answer the message with care. The sacred is not proven by escaping the ordinary. It is proven by entering it fully. Some people keep chasing peak experiences because daily life feels too plain. Wisdom suggests the opposite. The ordinary is not empty. It is where transformation must eventually live, or it has not yet arrived. The deepest teachings return us to life with clearer eyes. After all the practices, stories, questions, and strange possibilities, the purpose is not to disappear from life. The purpose is to see life more truthfully. A person returns to their family, work, body, community, and responsibilities with a different quality of attention. They may not have every answer. They may not feel peaceful every day, but something has shifted. They notice suffering sooner. They recognize ego more quickly. They value time more honestly. They become less impressed by noise and more loyal to what is real. This is the mark of depth. The teaching does not remain in a book, a temple, a retreat, or a private experience. It returns to the way a person speaks, chooses, rests, forgives, serves, and begins again. Some people look for spirituality in the extraordinary alone. The deeper surprise is that it brings us back to the ordinary with greater respect. Life was never merely ordinary. We had simply forgotten how to look. And so, we come to the end of this journey through spirituality. We have followed the human search for meaning across silence, ritual, devotion, attention, and self-knowledge. We have seen how ancient traditions turned breath into practice, stories into guidance, and ordinary actions into sacred responsibility. We have walked through temples, deserts, gardens, rivers, mountains, and quiet rooms of the mind. And again, the same insight has returned in different forms. Life is deeper than habit allows us to notice. Spirituality does not ask us to reject the world. It asks us to meet it with clearer eyes. It asks us to listen before we rush, to pause before we react, to notice what the body is saying, to ask whether our desires are serving us or quietly leading us away from peace. Perhaps the greatest teaching is also the simplest. The doorway is already close. It may be in the next breath. It may be in the next act of kindness. It may be in the small moment when the mind stops reaching and finally rests. So now, let the questions soften. Let the old teachers fade into the background. Let the long road of ideas become still inside you. If you enjoyed this journey, you are warmly invited to like, subscribe, or leave a thought below. It helps others find their way here too. And if you happen to still be awake, there is another video waiting on the screen, ready to carry you a little further. But for now, there is nothing more you need to understand. Let your shoulders release. Let your breathing slow. Allow your eyes to grow heavy and let the day loosen its hold. May your mind become quiet enough for rest. May your body remember that it is safe to soften. Sleep well and good night.